It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and Beth says, it's time. Now, these are not Braxton Hicks contractions. These are the real thing. Within minutes, we're in the car and we're racing towards the hospital, come up to a red light, and I stop. Beth says, run it. I look over at her. I run that red light. That was our first Bonnie and Clyde moment. But we got to the hospital, and the doctors and the nurses took over. And I thought my love for Beth was high. I didn't think it could grow. But watching her go through 7 hours of hard labor, my respect and love went to new levels. On November 16th, 1993, at 9:34 a.m., our son, Bo, was born. And this was one of the happiest days of my life. The first call I made was to my dad. Dad, you have a new grandson. He was so, so happy. And the cool thing was that he was born at 9:34. And 34 was my dad's favorite number because he was born in 1934. And so he was my greatest cheerleader. He was the guy that would always say, great job. He was the first one. If there's any problems, he would be there to help me out. So he was kind of my cheerleader. He was my go-to guy. And this was one of the happiest days of my life. But it wasn't going to last very long. Because you see, the next morning, my stepmom called. And when she called, I could tell by the tone of her voice that something was bad. Something really bad had happened. And so she said, Blaine, I'm sorry. Your dad had a massive heart attack, and he died. And in that moment, I didn't know what to do. I ended the call. I was in shock. And I was crying with Beth in this hospital room. And I remember walking into, there was a little bathroom that was part of this. And I kind of fell to the floor. And I started crying. I started weeping. And I'm not a big crier. I cry more today than I did back then. But that time was the time I cried the hardest. Because that was my cheerleader. He was my go-to guy. And he was gone instantly. You see, he died from what's called sudden death heart attack. And that means you have a heart attack and you die from the very first one. You don't know you have heart disease. You don't know any of that stuff. And so I had to pull myself together. I pulled myself together. I had to fly back, bury my father. And then when I came back, I had to make a choice. Was I going to be bitter? Or was this going to make me better? And I had all the reasons. I was bitter. I was bitter at the world. I was bitter at my circumstances. And I was even bitter at God at that moment. But when I got back at that time in my life, what saved my life was WYTAYBA. So WYTAYBA saved my life. And I want to share with you how WYTAYBA saved my life. But what I want to do is, I'm more kind of a teacher, trainer, educator person. And I want to make sure that you understand what WYTAYBA is, number one. And number two, I want you to use WYTAYBA. I want you to be able to start using it right now, today. And so WYTAYBA kind of sounds like a circus tiger's name. What does it stand for? It's actually an acronym. And we have the nice lights here that my wife set up. And it stands for what you think about, you bring about, right? So say that. What you think about, you bring about. Everybody say it. What you think about, you bring about. Now, to anchor that in, it's good if you do some type of movement or motion to like it in. So now when you say it like this, say, what you think about, point to your head. Everyone say, what you think about, you bring about. And do this with the roller. So what you think about, exactly. So what you think about, you bring about. Now, I want to have a little fun because I want to teach a little bit and make it so you understand this concept. So we handed out some cards. They're called WYTAYBA cards. And the cards, there's 3 different cards because I'm going to have you hold up which you are, whether you're an expert, an intermediate, or a novice. So if you can get those cards out. First of all, do we have any gardeners in the room? Who knows what this is? Tomato plant. Very good. So we have some gardeners in the room. Now, in gardening, whatever you put in the soil returns, right? So if you plant tomato seeds, you get tomatoes. If you plant carrots, you get carrots, right? So whatever is planted is returned. And so the first thing I want to know is, what type of gardener are you? So if you're a novice, that means you hate gardening, you've never planted a garden. Intermediate, someone that has planted a few gardens. And if you're an expert, then you not only can you plant, you can probably teach somebody else. So hold up the card. Let me see what we have in the room. Okay, so we've got intermediates, experts, a bunch of novices over here, okay? All right, so if you plant nothing, then you get nothing. And for me, this is one of the greatest tragedies of gardening, first of all, is if nothing's planted, then nothing could ever grow, right? You might get weeds, which is even worse. That's stuff you don't want. But you've got to plant something to grow something. And so your mind, WYTAYBA, what you think about, you bring about, your mind is like that garden, that whatever you plant in the mind is what you can bring about, right? So you've got to plant something in there. So my second question for you that we'll answer with the cards is, what type of gardener of the mind are you? What type of gardener of the mind are you? And so what that means, the novice is someone who really, their life is almost run by circumstance. Right? They're not planting any kind of ideas of what they want. They're just run by circumstance. An intermediate gardener of the mind is somebody that has some goals, has written goals, plants some things in their mind, what they want. Maybe you've got some goals and some things you want to accomplish, and to-do list. That's the intermediate. And the expert is the person that actually plants what they want every day, but multiple times during the day. They're always planting what they want. So hold up the cards. Let me see if you're a novice, or if you're an intermediate. Almost all intermediates. That's pretty good. All right, a couple of experts over here. Perfect. Well, it turns out that brain science, neuroscience, is kind of finally proven why WYTAYBA works. And so have you ever had this experience where maybe you test-driven a new car, or you bought a new car, or in my case, your son bought a new Acura car, and all of a sudden, you see them everywhere, right? Or someone tells you about a red car, and all of a sudden, you see them everywhere, Acura. So after my son sent us a picture of his car, I'm seeing them all over the place, right? Now, is that new? Were they never there, or were they always there and I'm tuning into it? It turns out that, yes, they were always there, but I was tuned into it. And so science has found and discovered something called the reticular activating system. And it's about the size of your pinky in the back of the brain, and it's the filter. It decides what's going to come into your mind, right? So when I planted the seed of the Acura car, now I'm seeing it everywhere, right? Because the reticular activating system is letting in stuff to support. It's giving me data to support what I think is important. Right? Same thing if someone calls your name in a crowd area, you hear that. It's the reticular activating system. So what I want to do now is I want to make this real for you. So if you turn over any one of those cards, you're going to see on the other side, there's some lines there, and then it says WYTAYBA. But on those lines, I want you to write down one thing that you want to bring about in your life. So I want you to write down one thing that you want to bring about in your life right now. So think about that for a minute. Typically, sometimes people will do health. Maybe you want to drink more water. Maybe you'd like to exercise more. Sometimes people want to bring about something in connections and relationships. Maybe you want to deepen a relationship with someone. Maybe you want to meet somebody new. So take a moment, write that down. Maybe you want a new job, so write down better job. Now, if you're sitting next to your boss, don't write it in code, right? Better J. So if you have to write it in code, that's okay, as long as you know what it is. That's all that matters. Or maybe it's something spiritual. Maybe there's something that you want a deeper connection with God. But right now, take a moment. Just write down the first thing that comes to your mind that you want to bring about in your life. So now we have the seed. What you think about, you bring about. And so there's three components there. One is that this thing you want. Now you have that seed. The second thing is we got to program the RAS. And then third is you have to take actions. The key to this whole thing working, WYTAYBA working, is you take the action that the RAS brings up. So the second part of this is, how could we program the RAS? Do you think it's possible that I could remind you, let's say you wrote down, I want to exercise more. Do you think I could remind you of that 100 times a day, every day? Now, it would be considered nagging, but nagging does work. But do you think I could remind you 100 times a day? Is that possible? Well, it is possible because right now you live in a very unique time and space because you have the most powerful device known to mankind, and that is the smartphone. Right? So everybody, now there may be a few flip phones in the audience, and that's okay, don't worry. But most people have smartphones. And so if you see on the screen here, that's the unlock screen. Some smart people, this one company, they took 150,000 people, and they put a little piece of code, and they measured how many times they turned on their phone and unlocked it. How many times they did. How many times a day do you think the average person unlocks their phone? 10? 50? 80? I heard 100, very close. It's actually 110 times a day. 110 times, that's the average. Now, there's some people that do much more than that. If you think about it, that might only be like 6 or 7 an hour of waking hours. Some people, they were tracking, they were surprised how many people checked it between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. But this is the number one tool for programming your RAS is the unlock screen. Right? And so you see on the screen here, what I did about 3 weeks ago is I made this one similar to the piece of paper you have. I have rocked the TED Talk. So 110 times a day, I'm seeing that. So I worked a lot, to prepare for this. But my RAS was giving me ideas. Oh, you could do this, or you could do that. Try this. Make it interactive. Do this, do that. And so the number one thing, if you take nothing else away from our time together today, is to understand WYTAYBA. What you think about, you bring about. But the action steps, see, I'm kind of a nuts and bolts, practical, do stuff guy. And if you do one thing is to take that one thing you want, that thing you're trying to bring about, and take a picture, of that card with your cell phone, and then make that your unlock screen, right? Make that your unlock screen. Now, if you don't know how to do that, ask a teenager, or on the break, ask somebody. We'll show you how to do it. Because I was surprised. I started my own study, my own research, and I started checking people. And you know what? I was working with coaching an attorney just last week, and we turned on his phone. He said, turn your phone on, let me see that. It was the default screen. I was in another meeting just this week, and I said, let me see your phone, just curious. The default screen, it's unused. That's that unplanted garden that I was talking about. Let me finish with this. Let me come back to how I used WYTAYBA. See, I came back from that funeral, and then this is a picture of my dad there when he came out to my graduation. This is one of those Polaroids. He loved the Polaroids. So I came back from his funeral, and I was bitter, and that was the roughest Christmas that I ever had. I just wanted it to be over. But I knew the concept of WYTAYBA, what you think about, you bring about. And I knew that if I planted bitterness, it was going to take root. If I gave any more consideration to bitter, it was going to get bigger. And that's not what I wanted. So I knew that I had to plant a seed, and I came up with that seed, and that seed was to be a work-at-home dad. And so I had to get that. I came up with the seed. I made a decision. Then I had to program the RAS. Now, I wish I had the smartphone. It would have been easier. But I had to make some cards. I had to listen to a lot of audio tapes. And I really had to drown out all the noise, all the bitterness, all the little voice of doubt. I had to drown all that stuff out. And the RAS started finding things for me. So that critical step, so you plant the seed, you program the RAS, but then you got to take action. You got to actionize it. And so things started happening. My RAS was tuning me into a home-based business I could do, another business I could run from home, a friend of mine I could partner in another business. And all that stuff happened. And after a year, I made that jump to full-time dad in honor of my dad. And so then, for the last 20 years, I've been that person. Right? So I've been at the school, at the bus stop, coached the soccer, coached the tennis. I've been very involved with the kids. But you can have that too, right? That can be there for you as well. So this is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to plant that seed. You already wrote it on the card. But plant that seed. What do you want? What you think about, you bring about. You have that opportunity right now to plant that seed. And when that seed starts to grow and the RAS kicks in, possibilities are going to be there, right? Because the garden of your mind is endless. The RAS is waiting. What you think about, you bring about. WYTAYBA. I'm Blaine Elkers. Thank you very much.